Well, hello there, motherfuckers. I know it's been a while since I've done a retro review, a retro pay-per-view review, and I figured I might get back into that. So here we go, SummerSlam 1999. Now, I've watched some other pay-per-views that I haven't reviewed, and I might go back to those eventually. But, let's talk a little bit about this pay-per-view. This is a very enjoyable show. Watching it again, I think it's better than I even remembered it. I remember I had this pay-per-view on VHS for a while. It was recorded right off of pay-per-view. I had gone back and I had watched the show a couple of times. I always found it to be a pretty enjoyable show, but it's better than I remember it. Anyway, we start off with Jeff Jarrett and D'Lo Brown. This is with two titles on the line. On the previous Raw, D'Lo Brown had won the Intercontinental Championship, to add to his European Championship. So he had two titles at one time, and this was pretty cool. This is something that we don't see a lot of nowadays. We saw it briefly with Seth Rollins holding both belts and being a double champion. When he had the U.S. and the World title. And this was, pretty similar in a lot of ways. This was a good opener. Jeff Jarrett acts like he's angry with Deborah. Deborah asked D'Lo to take her out to the ring. And Deborah ends up aiding Jarrett at the end. And Mark Henry also hits D'Lo with the guitar. And it's a pretty good little screw job finish. And pretty good action throughout, some good wrestling. D'Lo Brown, a very underrated wrestler. I think the guy had the right attitude, but even during the Attitude Era, he might have not had enough attitude. Sadly, this would be where D'Lo Brown peaks. He would never really get beyond here. This would be like his big moment. He would feud with Mark Henry. And then after that, he would just kind of go down, down by the wayside, really. He started tag team Low Down with Chaz, the former Headbanger Mosh, and he would never really get back to where he needed to be. Also, he was also at WrestleMania 2000 with The Godfather, famously being wrapped down to the ring with Ice-T. So, he had a couple of big moments, but I think actually maybe a bigger year for him might have been even 1998, the series of matches against X-Pac, To me, that was kind of like his best feud, one of his best, series of moments was in 1998 against X-Pac, the match at King of the Ring, and he had a couple of others, so I kind of think that was maybe more of his time that I recognize him for. But this is probably where WWE considers it to be his peak. A nice opening match at SummerSlam. He loses both titles to Jarrett. Jarrett would hand over the European title to Mark Henry. And this was something, the European title started off pretty prestigious, being won in the UK by British Bulldog Davey Boy Smith. And then they would do things to the European title, such as having Mideon taking out of Shane McMahon's bag and kind of awarding it to himself, and then doing this. So I guess you could say the belt started to lose certain prestige. But around this time, it was such a fun time. We didn't really focus on things like that. I don't think really anybody better than I with Jeff Jarrett handing over the European title the next night. So that's kind of interesting. Not that it's as big as maybe Eric Bischoff handing a world title to Triple H. But I think nowadays, even if they did something like this with the U.S. title, people would lose their minds, and I would probably, even in my Raw reviews, probably go after them. But that wasn't as bad. So, I enjoyed the finish. I enjoyed this was a way of sort of a not so successful feud between D'Lo Brown and Mark Henry. D'Lo Brown didn't really take off, I think, as much as they really wanted him to. And it might have been just really, there were just too many charismatic wrestlers on the roster. And even though D'Lo Brown had a considerable amount of charisma, of course, the head bobble thing, that kind of makes him so recognizable. And I think any fan who watched during the Attitude Era would know about D'Lo Brown. But he just didn't reach that level of popularity that they wanted him to. I don't really think it was in terms of the booking. It's just mainly that they just had too many guys on the roster that deserved their spots, and D'Lo Brown just kind of didn't factor into their plans. Up next, you had the tag team turmoil match. You had the Acolytes in there, Edge and Christian, and Hardcore and Crash Holly, the Hardy Boys. I think they started off with the Hardys and Edge and Christian, and that part of the match was obviously the best part. The Hardcore and Crash start fighting each other, which was pretty funny. I actually really enjoyed this storyline. I think it was like maybe 2 Raws before this, or how many Raws it was. Hardcore introduced Crash Holly as being a super heavyweight. I thought this was a pretty clever little piece of writing here, that Hardcore Holly by no means a small guy, but trying to get himself over as a super heavyweight was pretty funny. He was bossing around the Big Show a couple of weeks before this, so I thought it was a pretty entertaining side to his character, and it really kind of showed around this time with Vince Russo and Ed Ferrara and even Vince McMahon that they were exploring people's characters like this. Hardcore Holly, maybe not the best guy on the mic, but I guess the accent and a little bit of his swagger and a little bit of his attitude. I mean, the guy was Sparky Plugg just a couple of years before this. Also, they had him in the new Rock and Roll Express, or the new Midnight Express, I think it was. Yeah, the Midnight Express. And it just, he wasn't taking off with the long blonde hair, and I think the best thing they ever had him do was have him become Hardcore Holly. I mean, I think it kind of saved his career. This guy probably would have ended up getting released without a doubt. And, it really factored into his career big time, just by changing his name and the fact that they had the hardcore division around. He was in the right place at the right time. And this was this was an entertaining feud. I mean, Crash Holly was a guy that was like 5'6", 5'7", 5'8", maybe at the most, a very small guy, and they made him very tough. And for some reason, it was like, you wouldn't buy into it nowadays, but back then it was just the way how they presented. Hardcore Holly introduces Crash Holly and they start fighting the same night. You think of these guys, just because they're cousins, they're going to be together and they're going to have unity, but then they just turn around and start fighting each other. And they were even on the previous Raw, they were battling on top of a tractor trailer. Even just by talking about these two matches, you just notice just how different things were around this time, and that you could really just discuss these wrestlers, and there was just so much going on, and you just don't get that nowadays. So the Acolytes end up winning it here. Farouk hits, I believe, Hardcore with the Spine Buster, and they're getting a tag title shot the next night on Raw against the winners of the tag title match on this card. Up next, the third match at Al Snow against the Big Boss Man. Road Dogg comes out, cuts a promo before the match. Jericho comes out, and this is pretty entertaining. Jericho coming out, just insulting wrestlers, and just the whole way about him. This is what I'm saying about for the newer fans who are not familiar with the way how Jericho was his first couple of years in WWE. They were his best years. Cocky Jericho is the best Jericho. The Jericho that we have now, the scarf-wearing Jericho, is, talking about potted plants. I mean, how the mighty have fallen. And it's not Jericho's fault. It's the writing. It's the material that he's given. I mean, I guess he does an okay job at what's given to him, and he has to work with this subpar, childish material, but you really just... put those promos side by side. See the Raw promo that Jericho was cutting about a fucking potted plant named Mitch. I mean, going on and on about Mitch and talking about people posting on Twitter about Mitch, talking about these moronic fans that just are making such a big deal, thinking they're being hilarious, talking about a potted plant when it's all just a fucking potted plant. And compare that to, with Jericho's promo here being funny, being entertaining, the facial expressions, the body movements, just so much to like about Jericho. And just right off the bat, The guy was only on one other Raw before this. You know, they didn't have enough time to book him in a match coming out of WCW over to WWE. And it really, you know, you wanted to see Jericho. You wanted to see Jericho in action. You wanted to see more and more. So giving promo time to Jericho on the pay-per-view was a good idea. So anyway, Road Dogg decides that he is going to commentate during the match and follow Al Snow and Big Boss Man around. The match ends up in a bar. And this was one of the most entertaining things about the Hardcore title. They kind of stopped doing this later on, you know, around the time they started they dwindled down the backstage fights. And they retired the Hardcore title. It got fused with the Intercontinental title. When RVD and Tommy Dreamer had a match on Raw. Many people still to this day, they call for the return of the Hardcore title. And I wouldn't want a return of the Hardcore title unless they were going to handle it in the way this way. This was the good thing about the Hardcore title, is it enabled them to do some interesting things, like to leave the ring and still have the match, and get the pinfall, you know, like a mile away from the building. This match ended up in a bar. We see a moonsault, or a leg drop, or some move through the pool table to end it, or towards the end of the match. Road Dogg takes Big Boss Man's nightstick and clocks him in the back of the head. I don't think they go through the pool table. I think that was a separate table, but whatever it was, really entertaining. I mean, just to see a match end up in a bar and not anywhere even in the arena is just something that you won't see nowadays. And I think that's kind of why this pay-per-view is so much more entertaining to me now than it was back in the day, when this sort of stuff was kind of commonplace. Now you go back in years and years, so removed from this type of material, and I'm missing it so much. It just makes this pay-per-view so much more valuable, and all these older shows so much more valuable. Ivory defeated Tori. This was a really shitty match. I mean, you know, this is the one thing that I do have to say. The women do wrestle better now than they did around this time. It wasn't so much Ivory. Ivory was pretty much a pretty good professional in the ring, but Tori, ugh. You know, Tori and Sable had already had a pretty, you know, ugly match at WrestleMania 15. So putting Tori in another match here, I think they were kind of hoping. The finish is severely botched. The fact that Ivory even pins Tori after a botched sunset flip, just, you know, there's not much that can be said about this match. Ivory tries to rip off Tori's clothes, and well, that's probably the best part of the match. But at least he did have that. That added a little bit of attitude and pizzazz to it, a little aftermath to it. But this match is basically something you probably want to skip over. It's not really worth seeing. Ken Shamrock defeated Steve Blackman in the Lions Den weapons match. For some reason, this match was way better than I remember it being. I don't know why I thought that this was a short match. It's not really that short as I remember it to be, at 9 minutes. For some reason, I thought this was like a 4-minute match. I don't know what I was confusing it with. This was actually a pretty entertaining match, and you know, they had a pretty good feud going. You know, and they handled it pretty well, considering that Steve Blackman wasn't much of a talker on the mic, not much of a promo guy. They really handled it pretty well. Steve Blackman had backed up over Ken Shamrock. He had injured him internally, beat him down so badly that he had internal injuries that he couldn't even compete at the King of the Ring earlier in the year. And it, you know, they just kept going and going, and it was a pretty, you know, pretty nice feud between these two guys. It was a bit of a dream match for some, with the martial arts background of Steve Blackman, the MMA background of Ken Shamrock, the shoot fighter against the martial artist. And they handled it pretty well. I enjoyed the Iron Circle match they had previously at Fully Loaded 1999. Now, this Lions Den is not as good as the Lions Den from 1998. It was funny how they probably did it on purpose, having two Lions Den matches back to back at the SummerSlams at the consecutive years. Ken Shamrock against Owen Hart is a much better match, but this is still a pretty decent match. And the weapons element, I guess, adds a new dimension to it. But I think they used the cage a little bit better. I love that when Ken Shamrock bounces off the Lions Den wall. I think that is a pretty unique spot. He hits the elbow. He had done that in the previous year. I like this match. It was way better than I remember it being. Ken Shamrock ends up getting the win. He clonks Steve Blackman in the head a couple of times with a kendo stick, giving him the win. Test defeated Shane McMahon, the Love Her or Leave Her granted street fight. This is a phenomenal match. It really is. I kind of have a tough time deciding on what I think Test's best match in the WWE is, and you might be asking what other great matches had Test had. Well, it was actually when they brought back ECW. He had a match against Rob Van Dam, and it was pretty fucking spectacular. An Extreme Rules match that actually ended up with Test winning with a flying chair shot. This was another great match. It also debuted one of Shane McMahon's big moves that we did see a couple of months ago on Raw. He did deliver it to The Undertaker, the elbow drop through the announcer's table. We saw it for the first time here. We had a lot of good spots in this match. And really, there wasn't anything quite like this street fight up until this time. It's kind of a shame that they really didn't do more with Test. It really is, and as we know, it's a little bit too late to get Test back, having him pass away and all. It's a real shame. This guy actually did have a lot of potential. For a guy of his size, you usually hear people complaining that they don't have much athletic ability. But Test really did, and he showed in this match, he showed that he had a lot of potential. The thing that he was lacking mostly was some sort of charisma. You gotta say that his acting wasn't really up to par with Test and Stephanie. They wanted to have this angle, but I don't think they could have the same verbal communication that they wanted them to have on screen. And that's maybe why they decided to kind of peel back the Test. The Test at the end of the year was starting to get involved in some hot angles with Triple H, and then they really just kind of pulled back on the reins, probably feeling that Test just couldn't deliver on the mic. Thing is, you had someone like Triple H who was pretty strong on the mic, and a guy like Test who really couldn't cut a great promo. And they had tried probably, and they just they couldn't find the right character for Test. So what they did was giving him the angle with Stephanie was great, but then I think that once Russo left and everything, they started to kind of run out of ideas for Test. They probably didn't know what Russo really had in mind for Test following the Stephanie angle, and they kind of just got away from the whole Triple H thing, really. Just kind of phased out, fizzled out. But this is a phenomenal match, and I would say that it probably is the show stealer. I mean, this is a really, really good match. And it's still talked about maybe being one of the best street fights. Best street fights probably Cactus Jack and Triple H from Royal Rumble 2000, but this is one of Shane's best matches, and this is when we really started to see what Shane McMahon was really capable of in the ring, and how much he would put his body on the line. We hadn't seen really, we had seen a pretty decent match with him and X-Pac at WrestleMania, but we hadn't, and we did see some of that at King of the Ring in the ladder match, but this is the first time I really saw Shane doing some really extremely dangerous stuff. The seventh match, the Unholy Alliance, The Undertaker and Big Show defeated X-Pac and Kane. This was actually a team that I really enjoyed, and this was probably one of my favorite times for the Big Show. I think this was a really smart idea of making The Undertaker and Big Show matter on the main roster. And you really saw that the tag titles really meant something back then. And you could get a guy like Undertaker and Big Show to come in there. And The Undertaker was just fresh off of a world title run and a big-time feud with Stone Cold. They had a really massive feud, post WrestleMania. So what were they going to do with The Undertaker as Stone Cold and Triple H and everybody, had their world title match? The Undertaker, would he be left with nothing to do? No, they paired him up with the Big Show, a guy where they were trying a couple of different things with him at the time, putting him in the faction, making him a face. He came into the company as a heel, but then they figured, why not make the Big Show a heel, this big imposing figure, instead of making him like the lovable giant? We figured, why not make him a heel and put him with The Undertaker. The Undertaker had brainwashed the Big Show, using him as an instrument of destruction. And they would go on to win the tag titles here. And I really liked how they kind of demonstrated how The Undertaker was really in control. The Big Show hits a big-time choke slam on X-Pac. And for some reason, X-Pac and Kane just gelled so well as a team. This was really like your Shawn Michaels Diesel type of pairing, and it worked really well. And it was really interesting, X-Pac and Kane, guys from two different walks of life coming together. Undertaker, though, was in control of the Big Show. Big Show hits the choke slam on X-Pac. He covers him with one foot. X-Pac barely manages to get the shoulder up. The Undertaker is downright furious. He just brutally tombstones X-Pac and gets the win. You see that the Undertaker takes the titles and he just, he's unhappy. They've got the titles. Like, he knew they were going to win them, but he was unhappy that they didn't get them in that emphatic fashion that he wanted them to. He wanted Big Show to just plant X-Pac, hook the leg, and definitely get the win, but they showed that Big Show's inexperience, and his attitude cost him here. And I like that. I like how they kind of added a different layer of the story here. This is definitely what matches are missing, these small touches. You see, they're just not even really doing all that much. Just having Big Show just nonchalantly cover X-Pac, it nearly cost them the victory. Undertaker has to come in and take care of business, and they argue over it. So you've kind of got like, oh, now they're tag champs, but can they coexist? So you've got a whole new layer to the onion here of the story they're trying to tell. And you see, but not doing too much. They didn't have to write a whole big storyline here. There wasn't all these different layers that are not even interconnected. You just had this one little storyline, and that's all they did, just by doing a little something. So I always ask, when I do my Raw reviews and pay-per-view reviews, why can't they do stuff like this? Why can't they add a little bit of intrigue to the matches? Why do they want to make them so disinteresting that people are just not going to care at the end of the day? Because there's nothing really original or thought-provoking about the matches to make people want to watch them. The Rock defeated Billy Gunn in the Kiss My Ass match. This wasn't a phenomenal match. This wasn't like anything out of the ordinary. I can't even really say that these guys really gelled that well. It was sort of like an average match. You could see that they really pulled back the reins on the Billy Gunn singles push. I think it was a big mistake that Billy Gunn could have actually ended up being something a little bit more. But just like I said, like with D'Lo Brown, everybody makes this argument. I'm pretty happy with the way things went in WWE from 98, 99, and 2000. I really wouldn't want them to occur any other way. I look back on it, I'm pretty happy with these eras in WWE. The thing is, there was just too many talented guys at this time that there weren't really room for some of these mid-cards to move up. Triple H, Stone Cold, Mick Foley, The Rock, The Undertaker. There was way too many guys that just deserved to get at the top spot. And then you look at guys like Jericho, who undoubtedly were going to make their way to the main event. And sooner or later, Kurt Angle was going to be there. He would be coming in a couple of months from this point. You really just didn't have any room for these guys. So I guess, pulling back the reins kind of made sense. A lot of people say because they realized that Billy Gunn wasn't as capable as they thought he was. I really always thought that was something really interesting about Billy Gunn's promos, though. If you always noticed, he was always smiling, and he always said, at the beginning of everything. And I didn't know if that was like a nervous habit or that was just kind of like a little bit of a style that he wanted to incorporate into the promos. But it was really interesting always hearing, because he always had that little chuckle at the beginning. It's something to really, it's kind of more of a positive, I think, than a negative. But I think it was kind of more of just like a nervous kind of tick he almost did. So this was a kiss my ass match. Billy Gunn brought out a really, really large BBW, really disgusting looking woman. And instead of having the winner was supposed to kiss their opponent's ass, the loser was going to have to kiss this woman's ass. And Billy Gunn ends up getting face first into the woman's ass. And it's pretty entertaining for the time. It was pretty shocking. And that kind of added to the match. As far as the action itself goes, pretty average. Nothing really to write home about, but a funny moment. The Rock gets the win, and Billy Gunn had already actually pinned The Rock on a previous Raw that I was watching, which was kind of surprising. But as you can really see, The Rock really had no bones about giving somebody the win. I mean, this guy was pretty easygoing. And even had The Rock in a couple of promos around this time. He complains the next night on Raw that he's not getting booked in world title matches. Instead, he was getting booked against Billy Gunn and Gangrel and different, guys like that. And he was saying why he wasn't involved in the world title. And the thing was, around this time, it was kind of interesting what they were doing. The Rock wouldn't get back into the world title picture until the following year. Actually, he would be involved in the Rock and Sock connection with Mick Foley for the remainder of the year. They would not really have him in a lot of world title matches. Yes, he would wrestle Triple H for the world title in the first episode of SmackDown, but for the most part, it would be him and Mick Foley for the rest of the year, and they would be facing the New Age Outlaws and a variety of other teams. And they were really experimenting with The Rock. You could really see this guy was taking on a lot of different opponents. I haven't even gone back and watched him yet, but you had The Rock feuding with Val Venus, feuding with the British Bulldog, and they would keep on giving The Rock different opponents and everything. It kind of felt like it wasn't their time. They were working on Triple H. They wanted to give The Rock a little bit of a break, but he was still remaining really productive and entertaining around this time. And I find it impressive that they kind of kept The Rock in a position where he was still really entertaining and over. And he didn't really feel like he was losing any of his value, even though he wasn't involved in the world title picture. And it's the same thing with The Undertaker and The Big Show. They still made these, and Kane, they made these guys feel relevant, even though they weren't main eventers. And that is something that they really have to work on nowadays, because these guys were still over. And they weren't even presented in such a, they were still presented in a way where they really looked like they mattered, even though they didn't have to always be in the main event. The main event, the world title. Mick Foley as Mankind defeats Stone Cold and Triple H. Probably one of the most interesting things here about the story involving this match is that Triple H, around this time, he was new to the main event. He started getting a pretty massive push, and you can notice that the Rock Triple H matches meant more than they did in 1998. You really felt like Triple H was coming into the main event. You really noticed a different change, or what an effective heel turn it was. How they had Triple H and X-Pac, in a feud, and then you just noticed that Triple H just started growing and growing more towards the main event. And you really started buying Triple H as the main eventer around this point. It wasn't like, this guy is just the guy from a team, and now he's just here, No, you really felt like Triple H mattered. And you wanted to see what this guy was going to be capable of. And he would go on to, obviously really just dominate in 2000 with a variety of title runs. And this was a really good main event. Like I said, I think Test and Shane probably stole the show. But this match, once again, it was better than I remember it. A lot of action here. Jesse Ventura is the special guest referee. Jesse Ventura taking Shane McMahon and throwing him over the top rope. The story here was Stone Cold didn't feel that Triple H was ready yet to be in the main event, so he refused to lose here. The original plan was to have Triple H win the title here, but instead we actually see Triple H hitting the pedigree on Stone Cold. Looks like he's about to get the pin, but then Mankind ends up actually disposing of Triple H, hits a double arm DDT on Stone Cold, and he ends up getting the win. And this was actually really interesting. You never actually saw Mick Foley getting the win with a double arm DDT a lot of times. And it was pretty effective seeing a SummerSlam main event end with that move. And it was mostly because Stone Cold, I guess, was still injured from the pedigree, and Mick Foley coming in and hitting another move immediately after it. But you notice they got around it. Stone Cold actually took the pin in this match. So they booked it. They didn't want to have Triple H take the pin and look weak and have that as a smear on his record. So Stone Cold instead laid down for Mick Foley. So everybody looked pretty strong in this match. That we all know that Triple H would end up winning the title the very next night on Raw. And this was a transition. He was a transitional champion, because this wasn't the original plan. Mick Foley wasn't even supposed to win the world title. So you kind of have to really ask yourself, was Mick Foley only going to be a 2-time champion instead of a 3-time champion if it wasn't for this little conundrum where Stone Cold refused to have Triple H win the title from him? Probably not. I would think probably not. Mick Foley would probably be a 2-time champion if it wasn't for that little sticky situation that they had gotten themselves into. Really entertaining match. A surprise win. I think almost everybody at this time was probably expecting Triple H to win here. The build-up for this match was fucking incredible. That's maybe the reason why I love this match. And I kind of don't want to even say that Test and Shane really stole the show. I want to say that for the quality of the match, and they did have a good storyline going into that match as well. But this was Triple H had to really fight to get into this match, and Mick Foley as well. The main event as it stood was Stone Cold and Triple H. Triple H had beaten The Rock at Fully Loaded, and he was going to be the #1 contender. Then Chyna ended up winning a match against Triple H, and he ended up, or it was like some type of triple threat or something, and ended up winning that match. And for a while it was going to be Chyna and Stone Cold, and for a couple of weeks we actually believed that it was going to be Stone Cold and Chyna. Now, I don't think that was ever their intentional plan, but they had Mick Foley then returning a week before the match, and Foley actually ends up getting in the match. They add Triple H to the match as well. When Mick Foley and Triple H pin each other, and they decide to have a triple threat match. I mean, this was like, wow, you didn't know what to think. There were so many twists and turns and swerves in there. And then Ventura ended up showing up on an episode of Raw, and you had a really good segment with Triple H and Ventura face to face. And this was a really exciting angle, really, to go into this match and into this feud. And this was a great pay-per-view. This was a really entertaining pay-per-view, and there was a lot to really talk about. As far as numbers go, I mean, I'm just going to give this like a 9 out of 10. It's everything leading up to the match was just really exciting to this main event and to the pay-per-view in general. Alright guys, so if you have any requests in the future for any more pay-per-views or any specific episodes of Raw, just post it right here. The dogs are going crazy! Motherfuckers, they want to see more retro reviews, and so do I. Just let me know your suggestions down here. Alright.